Hey friends, it's Pastor Zach. It is Thursday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, I apologize to anyone who has been looking for the Bible study link. Last night was just kind of a perfect storm of circumstance, and so we decided not to have our Wednesday evening Bible study. But instead of pushing it until next week, like I had probably would have done any other time, I thought I really want to get through these books, and this next chapter is one that I have kind of foreshadowed for some time, and um, so I thought here. Instead of working through it together and talking about it and then releasing the video, I'm going to do it backwards. And I'm going to release a short video about these two chapters and then leave you with some questions to consider. And I hope that you will consider them both on your own as well as in the comment section below. I'll give you some questions for discussion. And maybe on Sunday, if you can come out to our service, we can talk about it there too, or the next Sunday, or via email, or however it is that we can just keep the conversations going, because that I think is what is most important in biblical interpretation, that there is not one set understanding, that this isn't like a class where we're learning American history or something. This is an eternal flower that is ever blooming and ever reopening to find newer and newer and more beautiful interiors. And so we're going to work through these two chapters in this short video, like I said. Actually, this is the second time I'm doing this. And the reason why I'm doing this live on YouTube instead of on a pre-recorded video is because the first time there was no sound. So if you ever want to watch a 15-minute video of me just talking and not being able to hear anything, I'd love to show it to you. On the bright side, that also means that maybe I'll remember everything. I say that as I lose my notes. Isn't that the way that it goes? All right. So I want to give you just a little bit of background into what's been going on in our story if you haven't been following along, but just a teensy little bit. Basically, the book of Ezra is about creating something new, dreaming up new beginnings, while at the same time dealing with those who are not on board, to put it really succinctly. Ezra was born about 100 years after Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple leveled to the ground, all the riches taken away, and all of its priests and teachers and prophets and rulers and leaders and rich people were all put in shackles and taken off to Babylon. And so all of the people that were left behind were likely people that were working class or working poor, people who probably didn't know how to read and write. And so we don't really have anything left behind from them. We don't know their side of the story. All we get is the side of the story from those who could write, who came back much later. So everything we say, take that with that gigantic grain of rock salt. We are always dealing with somebody's perspective when we're reading about history. But on the same token, their religious practice at that time was not a head religion, like something you learn and think through. There was no written text. There wasn't a Bible. There was maybe scrolls, but those were all held by the priests, and they were the only ones that could read. As far as the average person was concerned, to be religious what meant that you did the right sacrifices at the right times at the temple, and you did the right worship at the temple. And so the temple doesn't exist anymore. So all of those who are left behind are left to figure out what that means. And all those who left to exile were left to figure out what that means. And now we've got those two groups coming together and fireworks, right? So let me tell you about Ezra in a way that I think maybe will be easier to digest. So imagine, if you will, me, Pastor Zach, and my people were from Pennsylvania, but my people were also taken out of Pennsylvania in 1883. They were United States and France had some kind of imaginary war, and the French won, and they conquered Pennsylvania, and they took all of the pastors and the priests and the religious professors and everyone who really knew a whole lot in their head about how we practice Christianity here, and took them off to France. So 1883. So then I'm born in France, and I am what's that, like 5 generations later of people who are ethnically Pennsylvanian for all intents and purposes, but have spent 5 generations being Pennsylvanian in France. And now I get the opportunity to go home to my ancestral home, like 5 generations later. And so I arrive in Pennsylvania, and I stand up in the market square, and I and my people are finally there to tell you people what it means to be an American, what it means to be a Pennsylvanian, what it means to be an American Christian Pennsylvanian, whatever other descriptive phrases that you want to use. You can imagine how we might be met by the people who are still there, right? So after 5 generations, they would say, wow, not sure you're the best person to tell us about what it means to be Pennsylvanian. You've been living in France for 5 generations, and your version of Christianity really was informed more by the secularism of the 18 and 1900s in France, much more than we were able to keep it pure here in Pennsylvania. And we would say to them, oh, no, 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 you think you're pure. After our people were taken out, this land was overrun with New Yorkers and Ohioans and West Virginians and, God forbid, New Jerseyans, and even some Canadians came across the border and resettled in our lands. So you are the byproduct of all of this intermixing of people from other states and countries. You're not pure. You can't even track your lineage back more than 2 or 3 generations, because we took the genealogy books from the churches, the baptismal books from the churches, we took them off to France. So you can't even prove that you're connected to these people. You could be a Canadian for all we know. Plus, we took all the priests and the pastors and the religious educators. We've been keeping doctrinally pure while we've been in France. Meanwhile, this religion that you practice here in Pennsylvania, this is more superstition than religion. I mean, you've picked up all of these things from the local native tribes and from the Presbyterians and the Catholics and all these people from all over the place. And you're not doctrinally pure because you never understood this in the first place, because we are the religious leaders. And so now that we're back, it's important that you fall back in line, and we'll teach you again what it means to be pure. So you can imagine that would go great, right? Totally swimmingly, no problem whatsoever. And then imagine one more step further, that we receive a generous grant from the local government to rebuild our churches in Pottstown. And so now we've got the money, we who were born in France and probably do have more French ideals than American ideals, because these things change over time anyway. And we are now tasked with rebuilding the churches, rebuilding Christendom, rebuilding our culture, as it were. And so now we're faced with an issue. So we've got the money, and we're starting to rebuild our churches. And somebody whose family stayed behind approaches us and says, hey, we'd like to help. Here's an olive branch. Can we help build? Can we help imagine? Can we help dream this thing into reality, this new faith of the 21st century? Can we help? And now we who came from France, we're a little suspicious, because let's be honest, we have a vision. We have a dream. We know what we think God wants us to do in this place. And if we allow you to join that mission, well, I mean, you might just join us and come along, but chances are you're going to change us and pull us away from that mission. And no, thank you. And so there's like this illusion of purity that comes from our people, whether that be ethnic purity, racial purity, generational purity, or doctrinal purity, purity of mission, purity of politics, whatever it is. Um, I mean, for them, it was ethnicity and history and some vague notion of religion. For us, it's politics. It's are you progressive enough in your faith? Did your church use styrofoam cups? If so, how dare you call yourself a progressive? Or whatever other issue that it is, there is some impossible sense of purity that we all feel. And when we're trying to build a movement and create something that hasn't been created before, there will always be people who will come to us who are not 100% on board with that mission. And we have to make the decision about what are we willing to compromise of this vision that we have in order to include more people into that. So I would hope that I would do that with a bit more generosity. Ezra does not. And we read before a couple chapters ago where the people wanted to help build the temple and they said, no, you're not going to. And eventually they don't even worship there. And the society begins to bifurcate even further. So chapter 9 begins with an official coming up to Ezra and saying, yo, we have a problem. It has come to light that so many of our priests, our leaders, our Levites, they have married other women. They're not marrying the women who came home with us. They are now straying outside. I don't know. God knows who they're actually marrying. Jebusites, maybe. Oh, goodness. Can you imagine Egyptians? Oh, you might as well be from Tennessee at that point. And so what he does immediately, I think, is really important. He takes personal responsibility. Um, Not the kind of responsibility that says this is my fault, but the kind of responsibility that says my people have done wrong, and so I am a part of that wrong. He does not admit culpability, but he does take responsibility. And that is such a good core leadership trait. Now, any one of you who are in leadership, you need to pay attention to this. If it happens to your people, it is your responsibility. This is also true for all of us who would be allies of anti-racism. Anti-racist allies is that, I'm not racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body. I never owned a slave, blah, 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 blah. Being able to accept that you have a job to do because your people did it. And, you're not morally at fault for doing the thing, but you have a responsibility. It's easy for me as a Christian to look at like the televangelists taking advantage of all of these poor people and stealing their life savings and saying, God, those are not real Christians. Those are not real pastors. They're giving us all a bad name. But you know what? It's probably more healthy if I accept them as a part of my community, because now they're my problem and I can't just write them off. Now I have to deal with them. It's now my responsibility. I cannot just ignore them. Hitler was a Christian. That's hard to say. It is hard to own. It is hard to mourn that, but Ezra does it. He rips his clothes, he put sackcloth and ashen, the whole 9 yards, and he calls on his people to come forward and to make it right. And in the next chapter, he is going to form a committee who is then going to go family by family to look at the people who have married foreign wives and basically divorce those wives, send them off, I hope with some kind of nice severance package, but who knows, with the children of those marriages as well. Send them back out to recover some kind of purity of whatever. Now, I don't agree that that was the right thing to do. I think forcing divorce, ripping up families, you're going to scar those kids. That's not the way that we build a movement. And I think it's okay to criticize the decisions that are made in scripture. You don't need to just say that, well, because this happened and it seemed like it was blessed by God, that it is the right decision. We don't need to read scripture that way. I think this was the wrong choice. And I think it screams of some kind of exceptionalism that is so easy to fall into, where you think that your mission, your ethnicity, your people, your vision, your political party, whatever it is, has it right. And it is so important for the purity of that it not be obstructed by outside voices. That purity is an illusion. It's impossible. And so it's much better to try to figure out the messy process of living together than it is to kick them out, as it were. I mean, on a practical side note, it's worth noting that women in that time period, in that place, were able to own property. It's not always been the case, and it won't be the case afterwards. But they were able to own property. They were able to buy and sell property. And so if you had a Jewish man who owned property and he married let's say a Jebusite woman, and he died, and now she owns the property and she's Jebusite. So technically, they just lost a little bit of Jewish land, and they had just been given that land back. And so I imagine some of that is going on in Ezra's head, that the more of these people who marry foreign wives, we are going to lose the physicality, the land itself. Also the purity of mission, the purity of race, the purity of ethnicity, the purity of whatever it may be. We're going to lose that purity as well. But there's always some practical implications as well. So what do you think? What do you think about the way that this was handled? Oh, that's the other thing. Before I give you my final questions, the other thing I want to point out in terms of leadership and responsibility is the fact that we get a list here in chapter 10 about who was divorced from their wives and their children, and none of the common people were targeted. You know, your everyman Joe Schmo working guy out in the fields, we don't really get their names in here. The names that we get are the names of the people in charge, the priests and the Levites and the rich people and the leaders, the governors, you know, the people who are in positions of leadership and authority. They are the ones who are held accountable. And my goodness gracious, can you imagine if we ran our churches that way? Can you imagine if during, any, name one of the sex abuse scandals in one of our denominations? Go ahead. It's happened in so many of them. But if instead of that being swept under the rug and that offending clergy person then sent off somewhere else to another parish to go injure someone else, what if they were made an example of? And they said, if anybody is going to take us seriously, we need to have purity from the top down. So no, just because you're rich and powerful, you don't get to get away with murder. You don't get to get away with the thing that you're telling other people they can't do. No, I'm sorry, but you have to practice what you preach, and you will be held to a higher standard than those that you are preaching to. That is an excellent job, Ezra. Good job. That is such good leadership. And that is something that I think that all of us find ourselves in some position of leadership. And that's something that I want us to hold on to as well. That whatever you ask of others, whatever you demand of others, whatever you expect from others in terms of their morality or their actions or whatever, you need to be that yourself. And you need to be held to a higher standard if you're going to tell other people what to do. I hear that in my own soul, and I hate it. But so what do we do? What do we do with this passage, with these difficult chapters of forced divorce and what feels like really icky nationalism and supremacy and forced divorce? And I don't like it, and it's icky, and I hope you don't like it either. And I hope that we don't get too comfortable and we don't have too many good explanations of why these things happened, that we can whitewash them and say it was all for the best, because I don't think so. I think there's mistakes happening. I think this could have been handled better. But I wonder how we do that. How do we create something new? How do we forge a new mission? while having people who do not share that mission be a part of it. We're building a church. And I get asked so many times, why are you making another church in the midst of a place with 64 other churches? What are you doing differently? And I think that we need to be so careful in identifying what our mission is and staying true to that mission, because it'll be very easy to get pulled back into the comfortable ways of doing church that so many of us who grew up in feel at home in, that we get pulled away from the mission that we are called to. If we make space for intolerant people, then it no longer becomes a safe place for those who they are intolerant of. So we have to have some kind of limits about allowing people who are not on board with the mission to help build the thing. But where are those lines? How do you do it? Obviously, it's got to be a person-to-person basis, but how do we discern this together? Do we include everyone? Do we exclude some? Do we allow people on board as long as they fall in line, or do we allow our own sense of mission and purpose and purity to be changed when we are confronted by somebody else who doesn't share them completely? How do we work alongside those who are doing something similar but have a totally different belief system? How do we work to end homelessness in Pottstown with other faith communities that don't share our sense of right or wrong or purpose? Can we work alongside for common good with those organizations that spread hatred or bigotry or whatnot? These aren't just hypothetical questions. These questions matter, and I think it's very clear what happens when we do it wrong. We end up with, what's probably going to happen in the book of Nehemiah, and the sorts of divides that we see happening in the time of Jesus, and the sorts of kick the can down the road kind of nonsense that we've had in the United States for the past couple of hundred years, when people aren't willing to address things straight on. So I don't want to kick the can down the road, and I don't want this to be a hypothetical what if. I do want you to sit with these questions, to marinate in your soul, to find the places where you connect. But then I also want you to talk to us in the comment section right here, or in an email, or on Facebook, or on Sunday morning when we're together, or next Wednesday when hopefully we'll be together again. I want this to be a conversation, because this is not just a thing that happened thousands of years ago, but this is something that is happening here in our midst. And I want us to move forward with the most wisdom that we can. So thank you for watching as long as you did. I prefer things to be interactive, but time schedules are what they are. And I hope that we can turn this one-way communication into a two-way communication through the magic of the internet. So God be with you all, and may you be blessed in whatever new venture it is, whatever new dreams and hopes that God has put upon your heart. Amen.